Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Joe Chappelle, and you're listening to episode 73 of the OBGYN podcast. We have been talking a lot about fertility over the last few months, and today's guest is an author of a new book about what the process feels like from the patient side. But before we get there, I'll just say the Discord is up and running, and there are actually a few people signed up. This is really all for you to find a community of like-minded souls to connect to, so please consider signing up and making it a great resource for all of us. The link is at the top of my website, www.obgyn.fm, and as always, if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future shows, then please reach out to me at feedback@obgyn.fm. With that, let's get started with episode 73, a conversation with author Amy Klein about fertility. All right, hi everyone. I'm here with Amy Klein today, who is the author of a new book, which I think you're all going to appreciate. It's called The Trying Game: Get Through Fertility Treatment and Get Pregnant Without Losing Your Mind, published by Random House. Came out very recently. I've read through it. I think it's a fantastic book for reasons we'll get into. But Amy, welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much.
So, I read through the book, and in the beginning you kind of describe about why you chose to write this book. But I was wondering if you could tell us, I know you were doing a column that I think in the New York Times that was describing your experience with fertility treatment. But first of all, why did you decide to do that? And then why did you decide to take those experiences and make this book out of it?
Yeah, so when I started fertility in 2012, it's hard to believe now, but there was nobody was talking about it. The only place that people were talking about it were on these secret mother boards where people were using acronyms that you couldn't understand. Or there was maybe information, like as a health journalist, there was some journal articles, but there was no one talking about it in a mainstream place. There was no Instagram, there were no private Facebook groups like there are today. And I'm a journalist and a health journalist and an essayist, and I always write about what I'm going through, whether it's dating or skydiving. And I just felt like as a writer, I just stumbled onto this secret world, where women line up at 6 o'clock in the morning at these fertility clinics, and men have to go to these quote unquote collection rooms just to watch porn and jerk off. So this was a crazy world. So just from an author's perspective, I felt like I had stumbled into this secret society. But, as someone, I just thought that there should be more writing about it. So I started writing about it, and I started sending in essays to the New York Times, and the editor called me and said, hey, why don't you write a column about this? And we were both so naive because she said, oh, you'll do it for 3 or 4 months, and then we'll transition it into a pregnancy column. Because, of course, like everybody else, I thought IVF, okay, automatic baby,
Mm-hmm.
And then it took, 3 more years and over 30 columns for me to finally, on my 5th pregnancy, have my daughter. And what had changed, we didn't have our daughter until 2015. And then by the time I climbed out of early motherhood and breastfeeding and, the landscape of fertility had changed so much. It went from being no information out there to being so much information out there. And, there were Facebook groups devoted to every diagnosis. There were podcasts just beginning, and people were complaining instead of, finding no information out there. I think they were complaining about too much information out there. So I thought that, when I was going through all this, I thought if I had a baby, because I never was sure that I actually would until she was in my arms, I thought if I had a baby, I'd write a memoir about this. But by the time I came out of it, I realized the story was so much bigger. It was, how to help people who were going through everything, from the beginning to end. It's like an A to Z. I just decided it was bigger than my story, and I include my story wherever it's relevant, but I haven't gone through everything. I don't have endometriosis. I never had PCOS. I'm not single. I'm not gay. I'm not transgender. And I want this to be a book for everybody. Going through almost every step of the process. So that's how I came to this book.
Yeah, I think one of the nice things I really like about your book is that it takes, like as you said, we have all these acronyms, and nowhere is that worse than in obstetrics. We have so many acronyms. But you take all of this sometimes hard to understand medical stuff, and you make it. It's not something you make it simplistic, because that's not it. It's that you make it understandable and relatable. And even as a provider, because I don't do a lot of these REI infertility treatments myself. There's another acronym, REI. But So I didn't know everything that was in your book either from a medical point of view. And so I actually learned some things reading your book as well, which I thought was really nice. So I really felt that it kind of hit that middle ground between readability, understandability, but also being thorough and accurate, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you. Do you know anything particular that you learned?
I have to bring it back up again here, but there was some stuff, especially and most of it I think was really in the IVF, the actual IVF process. Because for us as general OBGYNs, what we do is, maybe I'll do some Clobid, maybe we'll try to do I don't do IUI, but there are some general OBGYNs that do IUI. But once we get past that, we usually send out to a reproductive infertility doctor, and that's like a black box. You go in there, and then hopefully you come back out on the other side of that pregnant, but I don't really know what happens inside that box. So your book actually described a lot of that.
Oh, good.
So I think especially for a generalist, there was a lot in there, not just for patients. But I do think one of the things that you touched upon there is, at least for me, is, again, that black box is, I don't really know what to tell a woman who I'm going to refer to an REI doctor. I don't know what they're going to do. I know generally what the workup is, but I don't really know what the process is. I don't know what to prepare her for how long it's going to take, what the psychological effects of all the treatment is. And then even when you do get pregnant and come back, I don't know what you've been through, because you're carrying maybe 3 years worth of fertility treatments. You're carrying that on your shoulders when you come back and you're pregnant. And all of that is now in that pregnancy that I'm caring for you for, which may make you more anxious and make other things going on. And so I kind of wanted to hear what you think general OBGYNs can do better to help prepare their patients either for fertility treatment or on the other side of it once they get pregnant.
Right. That's such a good question. I think the first thing is this just overwhelming feeling of shock. I mean, if you don't know anything about fertility treatment, can you imagine how little your patient knows? And you did a residency or something in it. So I think there's this shock, like this thing that you thought was going to be so cheap and so easy. Like that's supposed to be the easy part. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is not going to be as easy as I thought. And everyone else around me is having it easy. And I'm seeing all these pregnant women in your office. And why is it not happening for me? So I think there's a shock that it would help to have like my OBGYN say something, kind of hand-holding, like, don't panic. We don't know how long this is going to take. It might be a simple fix. So we're sending you to the fertility doctor just to get a full workup to make sure that everything is working properly from you and your partner's side if you have one. So don't panic yet. It's just that I'm not fully equipped in this to handle it. So I'm sending you there, but it doesn't mean you're going to have years of infertility. And it doesn't even mean that you're infertile. You could go to the fertility doctor. 1 month later, you could be pregnant. They could find this thing that's been dogging you that needs to be fixed anyway before pregnancy. So I think the first thing is to deal with the shock. And then also, like, don't panic. Doesn't mean that you're infertile, and I'm not giving you any diagnosis. It's just to find out more and to get a full, complete thing, and it might be a quick fix, and they'll have more information. So I think, especially with the amount of over information there's out there on the internet today, I think it's important to just say that, and you're sending them for extra help, and the extra help might be Clomid to help them produce more eggs. It might be an IUI, which is what I call the turkey baster, so the sperm could get where it needs to go if the sperm is especially slow. And there are a lot of people that succeed, pretty early on in the fertility process. Things that could be fixed, like maybe your tube is blocked and it could get unblocked. So I think those two things is to realize it's a shock, and it's not like you're shunting them off like to someone else to take care of it. You're just sending them to someone who might have more expertise in the situation. And then of course, and that's what I tell people in the beginning is like, don't panic. You don't know, you could buy my book right now, and then you could use it as a doorstopper in a month when you get pregnant. Or you could give it to a friend. So I think it's great that you're asking what an OBGYN can do, because I think, just taking that emotional tone, like, I know this is hard, but, don't panic, could have a long lasting effect on the patient.
Yeah, it's a good thought. I'm sorry to interrupt there. I think it's a great thought about even the psychological effect of sending someone to an infertility specialist, because it almost implies that they're infertile. And I never really considered the effect of sending someone to see an infertility specialist that makes them assume that they're infertile. In my head, obviously, I'm sending them there for whatever I'm sending them there for, and it may not be anything to do with being infertile, but they may interpret it that, oh, he's saying I'm infertile because he's sending me to a fertility specialist. So I never thought to really explicitly state that like that. So I think already that's a very nice point.
They're going home to Dr. Google. You know that right now, right? They're calling all their friends who've been through fertility treatment, and then they're like in a big panic. So I think to pull it back and just to tell them to be in touch and to update you. You know, they shouldn't come back 3 years later. I mean, I don't know the protocol, but hopefully, you know, they'll let you know along the way what's happened. And then, you know, whenever they come back, I mean, hopefully they'll come back soon pregnant. And I think, you know, obviously you do an intake and you might find out if they've had pregnancy loss before, or maybe you've been with them through pregnancy loss. And I think it's a different, you know, for someone who just can't get pregnant and hasn't had any pregnancy loss, it might be different what number of pregnancy it is for them. And when I was finally at my maternal fetal medicine doctor, my high risk OB, like I would tell them every single time, this is my 5th pregnancy. So like, I'm very nervous, you know? And so I think for people who have experienced pregnancy loss, or even people who have been in the trenches for a long time, I think they want that acknowledged. Like, maybe we're not going to be overjoyed every second. Maybe we're nervous. Maybe we just have a lot of like IVF PTSD left over. So you can talk about it and you can, you know, say, you know, and find out how as a doctor, how did it feel? How long were you doing it? You know, did you have any losses? And my final IVF doctor, you know, I said, I was like 15 weeks. And I said, I'm so nervous. When am I going to stop being nervous? And he said, you will not stop being nervous until you have that baby in your arms. And so it's different for different people. I mean, some women might just be like, I don't want to talk about it, I'm done. But I think most women would be grateful for the acknowledgement from their OB/GYN, you know, like, we're acknowledging this is hard and we're going to get you to the finish line and we're going to take extra care with you. And even if you're not a high risk OB, I think if you have marks on the chart somewhere, I don't know how the charts work, but if there was a mark on the chart somewhere that this patient went through IVF, they might need a little more hand holding. I was at a high risk, so I got to see him every week, but other women might, you know, you can say to them, oh, I know this is a stressful time for you. And if you need, you know, if you need more, if you need another, you know, not 4 weeks between appointments, you can totally call us.
Right. And we have women who, I've had a couple who come every, 2 weeks or every week during even the beginning of the pregnancy when they don't really need to. But that's what keeps them sane, to know everything's okay. And we accommodate that because we understand. But it certainly, I think it brings up a bigger point. One of the infertility docs that I work with, he said that his average patient goes through 2 or 3 IVF cycles before they tap out. Because it is just so, besides the physical stuff that goes along with the hormone injections and the stress of getting there every morning at 6 a.m. and that kind of stuff, it just takes an emotional drain on your body to keep going through the IVF without getting pregnant. And so I wanted to know your experience and the experience of the other women that you've talked to around mental health and reproductive infertility treatment. Do you note that are there resources for women? Because I know for like bariatric surgery, you can't get a gastric bypass without going to see a nutritionist and a counselor. But I feel like for IVF, we don't have that same infrastructure, and probably should.
I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that most clinics are realizing these days that the mental aspect has to be addressed, and a lot of clinics are adding therapists to their roster. But it's not the only time you have to go through counseling is if you're doing third-party reproduction, like if you're doing donor sperm or donor eggs or donor embryos, then it's a necessity. I wish it were a necessity today. I wish every clinic, doctors are super busy, but I wish they had a therapist on staff just to talk you through everything. I think that there are a lot of groups out there. There's Resolve, which is the National Fertility Group, and they used to have in-person and they have online support groups. And there are tons of Facebook groups where you can get support. And there are tons on the ASRM website. There are fertility specialists, therapists who specialize in fertility.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it would be great if it were included with your IVF package, that you get a therapist to talk to or someone to talk you through each thing. I think that most people today can find either a support group, a therapist, a marriage counselor, or an online group. I see the way a lot of women, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for different diagnoses, IVF for women over 40, IVF for repeat loss, IVF for donor eggs. I just joined all these different groups. And people really, they talk a lot in those groups.
Yeah, I mean, certainly having, people you can talk to who are going through the same experience as you is valuable, and whether it be cancer treatment or dialysis or infertility, certainly. And actually, it brings to mind another question I had, which was around miscarriage, which is certainly a very common part of fertility treatment. Actually, it's common in any pregnancy, but especially in fertility treatment. And I find that as a general culture, we don't really talk about miscarriage much. And most women are very surprised to learn that 25 to 30% of all pregnancies ends in a miscarriage, and obviously higher for fertility. And I just want to know, do you have any thoughts on why we don't talk about it that much, or why women are, not aware of that? And is that something that we as a society need to work on, or something that OBGYNs need to work on with our patients?
I think that the answer is both. I think that since doctors, OBGYNs know how common it is, and fertility doctors know how common it is, sometimes it's not given the emotional heft that it should be. I didn't have wonderful experiences with my doctors in miscarriage. I think there was a study, Dr. Zev Williams, maybe out of Columbia, did this study about people feeling that miscarriage was their fault. Most people thought it was something that they did, but until their doctor, that feeling was allayed once their doctor told them that it wasn't their fault.
Interesting.
So I think there's this, there's an intense feeling of failure and of self-blame and of expectations that are dashed. You're planning for, and it depends how long you were in the pregnancy, but, you're sitting there picking out baby names one day and planning your nursery, and the next day, this whole life that you had planned is not going to happen. And I think what I wish that doctors know or knew how to address and maybe help the patient was, yes, it's common, so that in a way makes you feel better, but it's pretty devastating for a lot of people. And it's also physically devastating, which nobody really warned me about, the effects. If you're in fertility treatment, you're pumped with extra HCG, which I like to call the happy hormone. So you're riding high one day with all these hormones and the pregnancy hormones, and then you take this spectacular dive in hormones, and it's gonna have an effect. Forget about losing the pregnancy, but this dive in hormones is gonna, you might experience a weight gain. That's what happened to me. And you're gonna have terrible mood swings, regardless of the fact that you just lost a fetus or a baby or whatever you think, however you think about it. So I think that if doctors would warn you, take you through the miscarriage and say it's very upsetting, and you might have some physical problems, and mood swings and weight gain, I think that would prepare women a little better. And I think that preparing women, if it's your first miscarriage, obviously you probably say it doesn't mean that the next baby is going to miscarry, so I think it's nice to know that it's common, but I think we also need to feel that it could be a spectacular loss for us. And especially for fertility doctors, and I get it, they're super busy, but no, let's not move on to the next treatment yet. Let us sit for a moment and deal with this loss. And you asked me when I'm ready to talk about treatment options, but all of a sudden I'm here dealing with this loss.
Right. I spend, so, we see women after a miscarriage is complete, whether it be, medical or surgical treatment of the miscarriage. And I personally feel like that visit is mostly for them to tell them that everything's okay, that this is like, they didn't do anything wrong. This is just nature's way of taking care of what would not be a baby. And that's just part of reproducing. Which doesn't make it any less hurtful to you. It doesn't make it any less painful to you, but know that you couldn't have done anything to change the outcome. And that, I think that's the most important thing I can do during those visits.
Is that, okay, I don't know if that's true, that it's always nature's way of taking someone
you can, it depends on what you're talking about. Fertility, I think it's a little different. If you're talking about, a 22-year-old who gets, pregnant and has no issues and then has a miscarriage at 6 weeks, that's usually because the embryo is not developing correctly for whatever reason that may be.
Right.
If you're talking about someone who's going fertility or maybe has lupus and keeps having recurrent miscarriages at 14 weeks, that's a whole different story. And I would not use the same lines on that particular visit.
For sure.
But mostly it's around the fact that it's nobody's fault. There's nothing you can do about it. At least I'm talking about common miscarriage, not necessarily recurrent miscarriage for whatever reason that may be.
There's nothing they could do about it, and it's okay to feel upset.
Correct.
I think that those are the things together. Like, it's okay. It is a loss. We know it's a loss for you, as common as it might be. We know this is a loss.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that second part of it is maybe even more important than the first. So I definitely, and we see that all the time as whether it be midwives or OBGYNs or MFMs, we do see miscarriage a lot. So and I know we all have our own personal ways of dealing with those visits, but they're certainly the most difficult.
For sure. I just think if you start your visit with "I'm sorry for your loss," that would have made the world of difference to me.
Fair enough. I think it's amazing how sometimes the simplest and most obvious thing can make the most difference. Right. Yeah. So the next thing I kind of wanted to move on to, I guess we already covered it, and maybe you can tell me if we did, but let's say you have a friend or a colleague and someone who's going to go under fertility treatment, or maybe not a friend anymore. Now that you wrote this book, you might have people talking to you that you didn't know, but they're going to start fertility treatment. What's your most important piece of advice that you give them?
Well, we did talk about the don't panic.
Right.
The other thing is one step at a time. You don't have to read my whole book, and you don't have to have a medical degree in fertility, and you don't have to know about every treatment and everything, because it might be shorter than you think, and you don't have to know every single thing right now, because you should take it one step at a time, both emotionally and financially. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, and for people who have, that's just starting out, but for people who have been in it for a while, I kind of tell them, if you're in it, if you're really going to do treatment, is maybe to set up some sort of plan. Like, okay, we're going to do 3 turkey-based or IUIs, and then we'll move on to IVF. And here's how we're going to pay for it. Because that for me, my husband is the big picture MBA kind of guy, and he set out that plan for us. The 3 IUIs, 3 to 4 IUIs, I can't remember, and then the 3 IVF, and then we moved to Israel because we had coverage. Because Israel fertility treatment is free for citizens.
Right.
And for him, he kept the eye on the big picture, where I was like, every egg, I got 6 eggs, 8 eggs, 3 fertilized, 4 made it to blast. Those kind of things. I was like, but he was like the big picture. Okay, we're doing 3 rounds here at this clinic. So that was really important to just not to have a plan right away, but at some point maybe have a technical and financial plan.
Yeah, I feel like the financial plan, we talked a couple episodes ago in our a different episode about the cost of especially IVF, which is very expensive, without even getting into a donor egg or whatever that may be. And, I think a lot of people were astounded by how much each cycle can cost. And so I have to imagine that the financial cost of doing IVF must weigh on any couple.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible if you think about, I think people spend like an average of $20,000 a cycle, and then, three cycles. I mean, that's an that's a down payment on your house. That's
Mm-hmm.
your kids' college education. Thankfully, places like New York just made fertility coverage a mandate for three cycles if you're at a company over 50 employees. New Jersey, Boston. So, I have one chapter on fertility treatment, what people do, the crazy things that people do. I myself moved countries, which was not in my plan, but I don't recommend it. But, you can find an employer, Starbucks, Bank of America, that offers fertility treatment. And it's going to upend your life, but it would be nice if you didn't have to, come out of it $100,000 in debt.
Right. And actually, this leads into one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, which is about insurance coverage, sexual orientation, surrogacy. These are all parts of what we call fertility equality, which we talked about a couple episodes again on our podcast. So, and in your travels and you're talking with all these people who have gone through this, what is kind of your impression about the movement towards insurance coverage, towards lack of discrimination based on sexual orientation, and even including surrogacy inside of that fertility treatment as one of the options that treats infertility?
I mean, it's really hard to discuss right now because we barely have health care in this country, and shows if Obamacare is going to even be dismantled with a new Supreme Court. I'm sorry, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but yeah. I'm not super hopeful just because of what's going on in the news. So it's hard to ask for fertility coverage when people can't even get their basic stuff covered. It is important, and these people and these states that are fighting for fertility rights, like New York, they're trying to get rid of mandates where same-sex couples, let's say, for example, a same-sex couple has to go through 3 IUIs. You're not going to get pregnant if you're two women. It's just not going to happen on your own, or you have to try for 6 months naturally. So it's nice that those kind of provisions are being overridden. And it's nice, New York, I went down to Albany last year to lobby for surrogacy. And as awful as the pandemic is, there's not really many good things about it, but at least Governor Cuomo slipped in surrogacy into his March bill, making it legal in New York for compensated surrogacy. Now, that doesn't talk about the cost, which is at least $100,000.
Right.
But at least people in New York don't have to travel to other states, which right now is so hard to travel for surrogacy. So, there's legality and there's financing. I am optimistic, not necessarily about legislature, but I'm optimistic that more and more companies are offering egg freezing, fertility treatment, adoption, money towards adoption. And they're recognizing that you don't want your employees to go through years of fertility treatment. That's going to make them a basically terrible employee.
Yes, it is.
Better free, I know some people have criticized egg freezing by companies as a ploy to, keep them at the office more. But the way I see it is it behooves all companies to offer egg freezing because, you freeze your eggs at age 30, and at age 37, it will keep you, you'll have that baby much faster than if you just had to start IVF then. But it must be said that fertility treatment for a lot of people who do not have insurance coverage or do not live in a state mandated by, or who, someone like two gay men who have to hire a surrogate, it's very expensive, and it shouldn't be, is all I can say.
Yeah, we run into this problem, we're academic centers, so we do a lot of the indigent care for Suffolk County. And we have a lot of these women who are self-pay, or maybe they're undocumented immigrants, and they come for infertility, and there's basically nothing we can do for them. You can give them Clomid sometimes, but if you can't go through the workup to figure out what the problem is to begin with, Clomid is just a shot in the dark and actually can cause bad things to happen as well. So we feel really, really terrible for these women because we really can't do much. And oftentimes we can't even get their partner to get a semen analysis, which a lot of times is the issue. So it's very, very heartbreaking. So we definitely feel that on a daily basis here. Good.
No, I mean, are there any gynecologists who are not REIs but are fertility specialists?
There is an old guard of providers who will, like I still do IUI and Clomid and that sort of stuff, but they're mostly going away. Anyone under the age of 50, unless you're out someplace rural where you're the only OBGYN in a decent radius, you're probably not doing that. We just don't have the training anymore.
I mean, I love the new guard of fertility doctors. I love the younger generation, those in their 30s and 40s, who are going to sit down with you and be a partner and hold your hands and are not going to be all, like arrogant and just do the things without telling you. But I wish there was something in between a gynecologist and a fertility specialist who could, do the first few steps before you're down the fertility hole.
Right. And I do think if you go to places that are more, less urban, I don't even want to say more rural, but outside of like the Northeast corridor here and probably California and a few other places, you'll probably see more OBGYNs who do that. Here it's just, honestly, it's not cost effective for me to try to do those things. When I have someone, 5 people down the street who all can do it and do it better than I can, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think if you got outside the tri-state area, you'd probably find a lot more of that. I think we covered most of the things that were on my list. One thing you mentioned that I thought was interesting about your book is, so when we had our first kid, we got what to expect in the first year of life, and we never read it. But what we did do is every time we had a question about something that was going on, we'd open the book up to month 2 or month 3 or whatever it was, and we would read those 10 pages about month 3, and it became a very useful resource for those in the moment things. Because you're right, like if I read the whole book in the first the month of life, which first of all I probably wouldn't have enough energy to do that, but I would have forgotten everything by the time we got to 9 months anyway. But it was a very nice resource to be able to go to when I needed it, and I feel like your book has some of those properties, although there is a nice kind of overview of IVF or infertility in general, not necessarily IVF, but what you're getting into. Some of the chapters are very much like, okay, I'm going to start IVF next month. I want to read through this chapter in great detail and really feel like everything that I could be presented with. So it's almost like a textbook in some senses, because it's really can be used in the moment.
Thank you. I want to, I'm not a doctor, and even though I'm a health journalist, I never wanted to say anything almost in my own words. So I wanted to make sure that, like a doctor like Dr. Sasson from Shady Grove explains IUI in his words. Dr. Schoolcraft from Colorado CCRM explains IVF in a really nice way in his words. But I just wanted to give people, if they want to tear it up, the questions, like these are the questions that you need to know right before your first cycle. Mm-hmm. You don't know them any other time soon, but you need to know these questions right now. And I don't know exactly how doctors feel about patients. I know patients come to them with like all these research studies and all this stuff, and I don't know how they feel about it, but I think they appreciate it when, the questions are on point and these are the questions that they need to know.
Yeah, I think for most of us anyway, I mean, I won't speak for every, OB provider out there, but for most of us, we love when people come with informed questions. Sometimes when people come with, research articles, sometimes it can get a little frustrating sometimes because they don't understand the context of how that study was done and when it was done and what the results mean, even though the results in that paper may read as one thing. Really, when you put in context of the rest of the literature, it doesn't really mean that. But that being said, like good questions, that's a way to start a conversation. That's a way to have a back and forth, because a lot of times, and we get into this, I don't do infertility necessarily, but I do other things that require a similar skill set, is our conversation is less about me giving you information and more trying to find out what your goals are and what I can offer, and how do those two things align to get us an answer of what we want to do next. Because a lot of times there are 3 or 4 different options. I mean, it's right there in your book. There are 3 or 4 different approaches to infertility, and some are going to be right for different people. And are you going to do 1 IUI? Are you going to do 2 IUIs? Can you do 3 before you go to IVF? And that's going to be different for different people based on what your needs and wants and timetables are. And so I think sussing out that is sometimes those questions really help me get to the core of what the women really are trying to get out of it. So we appreciate it.
I wonder, the thing about fertility is, it's such a new field, and it's changing at such a fast breakneck speed. I don't know if that's like that in your field, but something that was done 5 years ago is no longer done in fertility. And I think that's why it's confusing for a lot of people. And there are a lot of clinics that say this is the only way it's done. And I just want women to know that it's not the only way that it's done. There's different ways that different people do it, and only time will tell what is the right way, if there is a right way or different ways for different people.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, when I was a resident, they were still doing 2 or 3 eggs inserted per IVF cycle, and now that's really 1 or 2 max.
Right.
So it has changed. I mean, and all the drugs have changed since I was a resident. So even if it's like that's why I don't really do it anymore, because even what I learned in residency is now completely obsolete.
Right.
So some of the workup is similar as far as semen analysis, but even AMH or anti-Mullerian hormone, which used to be used very extensively for ovarian reserve, is now starting to fall out of favor a little bit.
Right.
And that's only in the last year and a half, and we used to send an AMH on everybody. So it's very difficult to keep up.
It is difficult.
All right, I think that's really what I had for you. Do you have any other things that you want to talk about, or any other comments to make about your book or about fertility treatment?
I think we didn't really talk so much about baby envy. And actually, someone wrote to me today that they had to go to their OBGYN's office for a DNC because they had a miscarriage and they sat in the room with all the other pregnant women. So if I could put a call out there to OBGYNs to be more sensitive to women who have experienced miscarriage and maybe have a separate room or a separate entrance. I think you asked me a long time ago what we go through, and there's just this feeling of loneliness, even though it seems like, miscarriage and infertility is common. I guess 1 in 7 to 8 couples in America experience it. There's just this feeling of loneliness that everyone's getting pregnant except you, and everyone's having babies, and everyone's posting on social, or they're just complaining about their kids. And, it's a little bit of this COVID feeling like we're feeling right now, like, oh, we're feeling so stuck. But for women who are going through fertility, especially now, it's just like your life has stopped. You can't make any plans. You can't go out. You can't travel. And that's a little bit like COVID, but you can't enjoy life like you once did. And you feel resentful of other people, and you don't even like feeling resentful of other people. And then, and I guess by the time they get to you guys, they're in the happy phase already. But it just could take an emotional toll on people. And I know doctors know this, but I want them to really know it.
No, I think it's a very valid point, and it does go back, especially the miscarriage stuff. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that miscarriage is so common, but just so not talked about. If you took 5 women, 4 of them, and 5 women who had who have gotten pregnant, 4 of them probably would have had a miscarriage at some point if they got pregnant more than once. But yet, unless it's your close friend or your sister or something, we just don't talk about it. And it does lead to this. It leads to the fact that people feel like they're the only one going through it, and that's actually the opposite of the truth. And I don't know how to, except like you said, we talked about earlier about how we can talk to patients during our visits. I'm not sure how to get that out there, that it's so common and that you're not alone. Now, of course, add fertility on top of that to treatment, and I think you have a whole nother kettle of fish there. And I can't even imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, I think it's just important. I guess my last thing is, to take care of yourself during this time however you can, whether it means getting off social media, whether it means not talking to, your pregnant friend for the first couple of months, whether it means, treating yourself better in a way, because you have to understand that it's a hard time and it could cause a lot of emotions. It could cause friction with your partner, friction at work. So you got to build these walls around yourself to take care of yourself until, you get to that viable pregnancy.
Absolutely. I'm going to put another plug in for your book here at the end. I think that if you are a general obstetric provider, it's worth picking up and reading to really know what you're referring your patients to. And I also think it's a great book that if you do have a patient who's going to do this, that you can recommend that, this book is a resource. And obviously, like you said, there are so many resources online now, but at least in this one, and I think obviously because of your journalist background, it's well referenced, well resourced, and as true as we know it to be today. And of course, 5 years from now, it might be out of date, but so is everything. But I think, if you want to give your patients a good, solid resource to go to that also is relatable, this is it, as opposed to, going to a Facebook forum or something where who knows what information they're getting out of there. Some of it will be good, some will not be good, or some will just be anecdotal. So I'm going to plug this again to everybody that you should definitely check this book out. Again, it's The Trying Game, Get Through Fertility Treatment and Get Pregnant Without Losing Your Mind. That's the key part there. Although once you do get pregnant and have a baby, you do lose your mind, but that's a whole different story. And that's again by Amy Klein, and it's out of Random House. Amy, thank you so much for being with me today, and I'm very excited to get your book out to more people.
Thank you so much.